Okay.
Hey team.
Hey,
Min.
you're
How you
on.
going, Dave?
Good, thank you. The order's all mixed around here, but it's nice to have you on right now, and we get a chance to talk to an expert exercise physiologist and also extraordinary athlete. I think for the viewers, Dan, they probably don't know that, you know, besides the scientist, that research scientist that you are, that you shattered the Kona Ironman record in 2018 and blitzed it in 8 hours and 24 minutes. Now,
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's very humbling being amongst you two, but yeah, thanks very much. The age group course record, let's yeah, but yeah.
well, it's
So,
well, that stacks up pretty nicely when you look at your time 8:24 and you look at all the pros that are doing it full time, and
yeah.
your full time job is your endurance IQ and your coaching business and your
Yeah.
white papers that you're pumping out and all the above. But you know, your time is legitimate because you went 8:35 in Taupo in the Ironman, right? And then
Yeah,
8:20.
yeah, I did. Yeah, with a crash as well, actually.
Really? Why'd you do
Yeah.
that?
Well, I rode into the I actually rode into the back of someone when I went down to, yeah, it was completely my fault, of absolute amateur. I was coming up and I had my drink bottle, you know, my drink in the straw, and I went and I saw someone up in front, and you know, you kind of clock how far they are in front of you before you
Right.
judge, but she was actually pretty much stationary. I didn't really realize it. So I looked down, and by the time I looked up, I was just on her, and I went boof, straight
Ouch.
to the back. But
But
anyway.
you recovered okay, because I ran into an SUV once and I didn't recover on that.
Yeah, yeah. An SUV might be a bit different to a.
Yeah, no, that kind of floored me and caused
Yeah,
a lot of damage. I have this finger that's here, and I always demonstrate with it, but it's kind of ugly. So it keeps.
that might help with your swimming catch now.
Well, no, not really. It certainly has derailed me from getting married again. So. Anyway, Dan, we've got Dean on here as well, and with your exercise background, athletic background, I know Dean probably has some questions. I have about 50 that I want to get to, but I want to come back to what Dean said about sensing that there might be a little more hopping action with 0% grade, and both of you probably had more video time and time looking at Zach's technique, and we can see the cam on his side view and also kind of a front profile. Just looking at his stride right now, and he's probably close to the 40-mile mark. I don't have the feed on that, but what do you think of his stride pattern, his gait right now?
Well, I can't actually see him right now, but I'm pleased you actually said that, because I was trying to find out yesterday if the treadmill is on a 0% grade, because typically, you know, in exercise laboratories and when we're doing testing, we always have them at either 1% or even 1.5% grade to try and mimic the outside. Because I don't know I mean, from my experience running on a treadmill, when it's at 0% grade, it almost does feel like you're running slightly downhill.
Right. Right.
Yeah, I find that, because so they reckon that 1%, it's about 1 kilometer an hour easier, or, you know, for the metabolic equivalent on the road or the 0% grade, which is why you generally would put it at 1% if you're testing in the lab, because you're trying to get, I mean, you're not doing a record, you're trying to get an idea of training zones and metabolic cost in the treadmill when you can take it out onto the road as well. So yeah, I mean, I looked at Zach's running, he's got that typical ultra, very, you know, low vertical oscillations, very short style. I'd love to know what his running cadence is. I'm sure it's pretty high, maybe 90s, even closer to 100. So yeah.
Yeah, he looks pretty good hip extension wise. Dean, I want to ask you a question, and Dan to follow up with it. We know that Zach is being fueled by SFuels Race Plus at about 40 grams an hour with a high cyclic dextrin or carbohydrate index. And Dean, when you were racing, and we were kind of talking about your New York City debut, and it'll be interesting when we get Jacob on here, because he looked like he was eating out of a garbage bin when he did his 50-mile treadmill run. Back in your day, Dean, on the treadmill, what were you fueling with? You don't have to give us a blow by blow, but I know that the science has certainly changed over the years.
Yeah, it has. And I mean, you and I have both been through the whole cycle, I think, of, the carbo loading. And then I went to like a fat adapted diet pretty early on, but this was before, like I would just go to nut butters. I found that nut butters really sustained me. But this is back in the, 2006, 2007. There's before we really understood the science of a fat adapted diet. So I was using primarily nut butters, hazelnut butter, almond nut butter, cashew nut butter. Those are kind of my go-tos.
And Dan, you've been on low carb, high fat for quite a while, and you've tested a lot of athletes, and you've coached a lot of athletes, and you raced low carb, high fat, but brought your carbohydrate index up in your record shattering 824 in 2018. I guess my question is it's an understatement to say Zach is economical. His top end isn't really fast, but yet he's holding 7-minute miles. He wants to bring that down a little bit faster. And what is your thought on his caloric intake? He's obviously being fueled with SFuels Race Plus. You had a similar carbohydrate intake, if I understand correctly, reading your bio and noting what you did with your 824. What do you think about his intake?
Yeah, well, actually, I've actually had a look at Zach's numbers. We had a communication during the week, and you can measure fat oxidation in terms of grams per minute. So if you take your typical very good elite guy, on a typical high carbohydrate diet, because there is a very large correlation between fat oxidation and how fit you are. Generally, the fitter you are, the better your fat oxidation. So if you get the best elite guys, they'll be around 0.7, 0.8 grams per minute in terms of fat oxidation. So as a fat adapted athlete, I'm at 1.3 to 1.4, and Zach's even better than that. He's at 1.5 to 1.6. So I mean, his fat oxidation is really quite high. But it's also a question of where that maximal fat oxidation lies, and from my understanding is that his maximal fat oxidation actually lies at the pace where he's going to be doing this run as well, where he's going to be running 100 miles. So he can easily get away with that low level of carbohydrates for the duration of this run. I mean, the difference is obviously he's going to be closer to 12 hours. Ironman's closer to 8 hours. So he probably, because we're on the same carbohydrate intake, his fat oxidation is slightly better, so he can go a little bit longer. Also, there are differences in fat oxidation between cycling and running. So generally, we see higher levels of fat oxidation than we do in running than we do in cycling. So these are all things to consider. So I mean, it just goes to show he's trying to preserve those what we call the endogenous stores of carbohydrates, and because he's pretty much burning mostly fat as a fuel all the time. I think he's at this pace, he's around 80% fat, which is quite a lot. Whereas most people at this pace would be the other way around, 80% carb, probably 20% fat, if that. So you can see where he's not, where he's not going to be chipping into those carbohydrates very easily. So it's really good to see. And of course, he's taking the Race Plus as well. So when you take that Race Plus, you're putting in those exogenous carbohydrates, and because it's putting in these exogenous, what happens is you actually burn those first. So you'll reduce your fat oxidation a little bit, you reduce your endogenous use of carbohydrates, and you'll use the exogenous. And that's been shown in many, many studies, which is then again preserving those endogenous stores. So, because don't forget, he is using some carbohydrate still.
So, Dan, on your comments, I think you're probably going to lose some of your viewers on this. I love talking about this, but very briefly, just touch on exogenous and endogenous.
Yes, yeah, sorry. So endogenous is basically any carbohydrate that we have inside the body. So I like to think of it as there's exo, which is outside the body. So carbohydrate that we're taking in and drinking, and I always like to think of it as like an exoskeleton. It's like outside the body, so you just think it's coming from out. And what's an endogenous is basically what's stored in the muscle, in the liver, in terms of muscle glycogen. So we all start someone like Zach of his weight will probably start his marathon with about 700 grams of endogenous carbohydrates on board, and it's about trying to minimize how much you're actually using those up with good fat oxidation on one side and taking some exogenous carbohydrates on the other side.
We've got an update right now, and we're going to see. he's 4 hours and 25 minutes and at 37 miles, and he's kind of right on pace. He's seems to be locked into that close to 7-minute mile pace, which that is the pace that he wanted to hit. Dean, do you have any comments on it right now? He's 37 miles, so just a mere 63 miles left. Boy, that gives me a rash thinking about the distance he has to cover still.
Yeah, he's got 100K left, and you know, he's really extenuating his arm swing, which I think is a good thing to get that lift. But he does run like an ultra marathoner, so he's got kind of that, you know, that as you guys are talking about, in his gait, he's kind of thrusting forward. And what I've noticed is that when you're at a 0% grade and you're running in the way he's running, it feels like you're running, as we discussed, feels like you're running downhill. So I hope he starts learning to bounce just a little bit more, just vertically versus thrusting forward. And I think that'll help him a bit. But, you know, like I said, Dave, I was ahead of world record pace during the 24-hour attempt, 12 hours into it. And I thought, this is great. I felt pretty good. And that last half, just things went very, very bad. So he's still very early on in this thing. And he looks strong, and he's been here before. But I'm sure right now in his head, he's probably fighting some demons.
Well, he's been there before, and he's got, I mean, the interesting thing, and Dan, I'm going to throw this back to you. He's gone well under 12 hours on a track for 100 miles. And the existing record held by Dave Proctor, I think, is 12 hours and 32 minutes. If he holds his pace, he's going to be under 12 hours. Why is there such a differential on open road or track versus treadmill, even and at 0% grade?
Yeah, it's a strange thing, because I think I mean, talking to a lot of athletes, like, from my own experience, not everyone has the same idea of treadmill running. Some people find it easier and some people find it harder. Like for me, for example, I find it a bit easier running on the treadmill, but I know a couple of guys that I coach, they hate running on the treadmill because they find it harder than running on the road. So it must be something to do with your natural running gait or whatever that might be. But I think, like, from my perspective, I do think on the treadmill, you are assisted a little bit in that the treadmill's bringing your foot back for you. Yeah. You know, it's like, it's giving you that little bit of assistance. So I think that might make it a little bit easier in that side. But don't forget, there is, I mean, and you've already talked about it, the effects of convection cooling when you're running out on the road cannot be overlooked, and it is going to be getting hot inside the room that he's running in. And that's, you know, that's why you typically will see, generally indoor sessions, you always get a little bit more heart rate rise, cardiac drift, because of, you know, you have this competing demand between trying to cool the skin, trying to cool yourself down, and you're trying to get blood to the working muscle as well. And that's something that you know, is something that you've got these like competing demands. You've got one side, the treadmill won't make it easy, but the other side, you actually can be getting quite hot because you're lacking that convection cooling. And I don't think, you know, there's no fan that can really help that. And if you look at a lot of the hydration studies, all the hydration studies that really show where there's an effect of dehydration are the ones with low convection cooling, when they're not putting a fan in, they're not accounting for the wind speed. And so, yeah, and those ones that do, they have like fans, I don't know if you've seen them, they're about the size of a wind tunnel, and they're like going 30 kilometers an hour, but you just can't really buy those unless you're working in a laboratory. So,
right.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things that you just talked about, and I'd like to get Dean's input on this as well, is visually where Zach is right now. That's not like running out in the roads and going up and down the mountains and looking at the scenery and the panorama. I mean, he's in this room, so you have this kind of this central fatigue or mental fatigue that a lot of athletes feel, combined with the heat load that you just talked about. I mean, the psychological part, Dean, in doing this 100-mile test, I mean, that room right now looks, I mean, I would just have visuals flashing in front of me. And Zach alluded to that. He kind of recycles 3 different areas where he tries to have music on. He sort of drifts off. He shortens the time period that he's running, so he's not looking at the magnificent amount of kilometers or miles that he has left. The mental side of this, Dean, what is your take?
You know, my take is not to think, just to take every step to the best of your ability. Yeah. As soon as you start thinking, you get yourself in trouble, right? Especially a guy like you, Dave, who's so quantitative. you start crunching the numbers, and you start worrying about your pace and this and that. And, to me, you turn off any thoughts about the future, any reflections of the past. You just say, my next step is my best. My next step, just get that granular and that Zen-like, and put your head there for hours at a time. Because to your point, when you start thinking, it's a long time to be on a treadmill.
There's definitely something. There's something about when your time passes so much slower. You know, I did a FTP 20-minute test just the other day, and that 20 minutes, it felt like, 2 hours. But if that 20 minutes was on the road, it would be, time's a funny thing. It can either go fast or it can go slow. Time is time, but it's not really. It moves fast and it moves slow. It's definitely more slow when you're indoors.
People get on the treadmill, and that first 10 minutes can be torturous because you're looking at every point, 1 point, 2.3, and it just seems to go in reverse. When Zach is holding this pace, I want to kind of come back to just his physiology. And this isn't a harsh statement by any means, because I think, Dean, you guys are so economical in your running, but Zach is not real fast. Like, his 5K is 15 plus, his 10K is 31 something, his marathon's 231. And everyone's going to go, well, those are pretty good numbers, but yet he's able to run at this 100-mile pace that he's doing right now, which is, hopefully under 7-minute pace. So his economy is quite good. And I guess my question is, and one of the things that Zach was talking about in his training, he said, what is your favorite training? And Dan, you just brought this up, FTP, functional threshold power. A lot of people don't know what that means, or lactate threshold. Zach said, I like doing those lactate threshold and VO2 sets. Can you just tell the viewer right now, maybe why that's important for a distance guy? And Dean, I also want to know your take if you did this high-end stuff, because we did talk about your strength training as well. So Dan.
Yeah. I mean, I've talked to Zach a bit about this in person as well, and he does do that work, but he looks at that principle of specificity. And so if you think about an ultra race, it's kind of more closer to what we define as your aerobic threshold. So the intensity is not that hard. So the specificity of the race is quite a long way from VO2 max. So he's doing that VO2 max work quite early on in his season, and then basically progressing the distance and getting closer to the specificity of his race, which is the opposite to how most people would think they prepare. They start with long, slow distance, and then they prepare and they get into their speed work. But at the end of the day, it's all about capacity, right? Everything is done as a percentage of how fast you can run, or your maximal aerobic engine. So you have to have that tuned, because Zach will probably be running at about 80% of his max during this whole thing. If that max is quite low, then you're kind of capped with how far you can go. There's obviously one of the main things of better endurance runners is they have something called a better fractional utilization. And fractional utilization, it means the percentage of your max that you can hold during a race. That's an important factor, but if your max isn't high, that's only going to go so far. So that's why it is important. And also there's the economy of movement as well. You've got to move your limbs fast, and if you can't run fast, he's running pretty fast regardless, even though, still 7-minute miles. If your max speed is, 6.5-minute miles, it's going to feel pretty fast. So yeah.
No, I mean, he's an economical machine. That's an understatement. Dean, did you do high-end VO2 or lactate threshold work when you were going after your 48-hour treadmill run and bad water and throughout your career? And I'm not making, it's a compliment, but I know a lot of endurance athletes think more is better all the time. And there's a lot of good science about more is not better. Just curious, did you do it high-end?
When I signed up to be on the show, I was told there'd be no math.
We haven't really given you the difficult problem yet here.
Yeah, no.
I understand that Dave's here as well. I mean, there's probably no better person to help us talk about the 12-hour, the 10-mile record than him. So, hi, Dave. How you going?
Hey, Dan. How you doing, brother?
Yeah, good to see you.
Yeah, great for having me on, guys. And by the way, Zach is looking stellar, smooth as usual. I was there at the 6 days in the Dome when he broke the 100-mile world record, and he even looks better today than what he looked there. He looks really smooth right now. It's pretty impressive.
Dave, thanks for joining the show here. We were kind of in mid-sentence, and I want Dean just to finish his thought, and I'm going to come back and I have a couple of beautiful quotes that you had said. I saw them on your bio. I thought they were magnificent. So I'm going to just finish with Dean just on this question. We were asking him just about the high-end training that he was doing. We're not going to do any math, Dean, so just spit out whatever you'd like.
You know, I'm probably like you. I got up to the point where I was running, well, maybe a little bit more excessively than you because I was an ultra marathoner, but I was doing 200-mile weeks back to back pretty frequently. And I definitely think I overtrained. You know, in reflecting back, I thought, you know, I was going into races not in any sort of state of full recovery, which was a bad thing. But we didn't know any better. We just thought the more miles, the better the miles. You know, I was doing a little bit of speed work, but nothing like I do now. I mean, we're much more sophisticated now than when I was kind of doing my thing. And when I trained for the 48 hours on the treadmill, you know, I would go out and do 2-day runs. So I would run literally for 2 nights without sleep because that's what I was going to be up against.
Yeah.
The treadmill. So I had to train for it somehow. So that was one thing that a lot of runners don't do. I always tell people when you're going to run a 100-mile race, you got to run through the night. So you better train at least once or twice running through the night. A lot of people preparing for the 100-mile race don't do that. And the sleep deprivation alone can get you.
Yeah, I mean, that part of it is I mean, absolutely remarkable. So yeah, 200-mile weeks back to back, that seems a bit excessive, but you know, you were still voted one of the best bodies of all time. So something didn't totally collapse on you. Let's bring Dave on here. Dave, you're part of the amazing set of endurance runners, and rightfully so. You've got amazing credentials. You're the existing world record holder on the treadmill, 12 hours and 32 minutes, if I'm correct on that.
Yeah. Thanks for reminding me. That was a long day, man.
Yeah, no kidding. But at that time, we were just talking to Dan on this. The record before that was 13:42, correct? And
correct.
So you dropped that record 70 minutes, which is remarkable. And we were just chatting that the road record that you saw Zach attain on the track is 11 hours and 30 minutes. Is that
11 hours and 19 minutes? Yeah.
11 hours and 19 minutes. So the difference between the treadmill and the track is astounding, remarkable. So you got the current record right now. What's your thought on this contrast of trying to do it on the treadmill?
Well, I think the contrast is simple. It's volume of people and the elite runners that are willing to get onto a treadmill for 100 miles and gut it out. You know, I'm not the fastest 100-mile runner myself. You know, my goal was to go under 12 hours with the treadmill. The wheels fell off with a hamstring issue, and I couldn't push the pace at the end that I really wanted to. But really, I think it comes down to volume of, you know, there's a handful of runners in the world that are dipping below, 13 hours for a 100-mile, and you know, it's tough to get under that 12. And when we saw Zach do it last year at 6 days in the Dome, 11 hours, 19 minutes, just knocks your socks off thinking about that pace. And I was there, and I saw his arm swing pick up, and like we're seeing right now, and it's a bit of a groove that he gets into. I think it's a mental thing that happens with his upper body. You think that he's slowing down, but he's not. There's a bit of a groove I think he's getting into. So I just think that when it comes to the world record, there's no question, unless the world were to crumble underneath Zach right now, there's no way that he's not going to break my world record today. But 100 miles is a hell of a long way. And there's a lot of bad things that can happen. There's a lot of good things that can happen too. So yeah, I'm just really enjoying watching him kind of glide his way past the 40-mile marker or something rather.
Correct. And when you say looking at his form, and you've probably had a better look than Dan and Dean and certainly myself on his technique. It looks like he's tuned in the TV right now, but in looking at his form, and you saw him when he did that 11 hours and 19 minutes, what do you think of his form right now at 40 miles on the treadmill?
Well, it's surprising, right? I'm surprised that he can run as fast and as far as he can, with a wide stance and having the wide berth between his knees. But you know, you don't question Zach Bitter. You know, you don't.
I wouldn't
Yeah,
either. No,
yeah, exactly. And so, you know, his stride pattern is what we've come to know as, you know, breaking down from the 12:30s down to the 12s, down to the 11:19s. So he's looking smooth. He looks fitter than what he did last year. I wouldn't doubt it if he goes back outside onto a track or 6 days in the dome again and breaks his own world record by dropping that into the 11:15s or the 11:10s.
Wow.
There's no question that he's got the engine to do it.
He has amazing engine, and I don't know if people have seen the backdrop over our shoulders, but if you take a look at right near the tag here, Dean, you're okay. We can see Zach's, his vastus medialis muscle on the inside, vastus medialis oblique. He looks like he's done. He looks like a sprint cyclist with the development that he has, and a lot of endurance athletes of your caliber just don't have that stability in their knee. I mean, that muscle is well defined. That's magnificent. I don't know if that was photoshopped or not, but that's, you know, it looks brilliant. Dan.
Well, yeah. And that's one of the things that I'm not worried about Zach on the treadmill here. Now I know everybody, you know, I was watching all morning, all the guests, you know, pretty amazing guests so far. Yeah, and thanks for inviting this bozo on the show.
We didn't classify you as that, Dave.
I don't know. But you know, like, you know, when it comes to treadmill, I know a lot of people say, treadmill's a lot easier. Like, you know, we organized this race called Quarantine Backyard, you know, a month ago, and you know, I was running the whole thing on the treadmill, and so was you know, a lot of runners all over the world, and we got a lot of those questions like, hey, do you feel bad that, you know, you're running on a treadmill, other people are running outside? I think that running on a treadmill for 3 to 4 hours is a lot easier. Running on a treadmill for 4 to 24 to 48 to, you know, 72 hours is a hell of a lot harder. Number one, the mental component. All you got to do is separate your legs and jump off the treadmill, and there's a break, right? Yeah. Number two is that the belt doesn't ever move, and so your foot strike, you're essentially committing to the same foot strike every single time. And if you have a break in your chain just a little bit, that's going to come to bite you at 40 and 60 and 80 miles in, and you're going to be crippled at 80 miles in. I don't see Zach running into that problem because he's just so strong and so structurally capable. But I see a treadmill, everybody says, it's a lot easier. I think it's a hell of a lot harder after 4 hours.
No, I would agree with you. After about an hour and a half, that's about as long as I can tolerate it.
Yeah, I was going to say that's the thing. No one would get that far to know. Most people.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Hey, Dan, I have a question for you, and we all want Zach to shatter, Dave, your record, and you're very polite in having your cohort and your competitor here, you know, do the best he can. If we were looking at fatigue in Zach, Dan, where would you see biomechanically him start to fall apart a little bit? And you're looking at his stride right now on camera. You're looking at his arm action. You're looking at his body symmetry. What do you look at with your professional eye?
Yeah, I mean, because we know, you know, Zach's well fat adapted. There's, you know, is unlikely going to be running into the problem of energy depletion or running out of energy. But I think what you can't really account for is the loss of efficiency. You know, so look at loss in the tendon stiffness, loss in the elasticity of the tendon specifically. So, you know, typically what you'll see is the stride length will shorten, becomes less economical, and then of course, because he's then less economical, it means he's requiring more energy to run the same speed, which means that overall energy expenditure then goes up. So, you know, you have to remember that there's two sides to the equation when it comes to energy, and we talk about fat metabolism and carbohydrate metabolism. But if you're if you're someone not, obviously Zach has really great efficiency, really great economy, but if you're
We've got the 40-mile mark here, and probably pretty significant and an appropriate question. He's probably looking at that halfway and hoping that he can get to 51 miles and feel smooth. Christina, you're on.
Did you miss me?
Pardon me?
Did you miss me?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I was wondering if you got in 10 miles since you were last on, but
No, I've got a couple of sticky notes. If you could see all the sticky notes I have all over right here. It's kind of like 10 miles of work. I mean,
Yeah.
I'd rather run 10 miles, but I did.
Christina's got the hardest job of all because she has to deal with so many different time zones all in one day.
There were a lot of different. I have had to resend. Sorry, I messed up your time zone. I may have had to send a couple of those, but really striving to hit that $10,000 mark today. Snap a code, get those in. It'd be great if we could get 20,000 or even more sent in to the fight for the forgotten today. The next award up is Ultra $100 online voucher. Again, reach out to us on social media and we will get those taken care of and sent over to you. And then the Purpose is also has another prize up, and we will get that to you on social media as well. And we'll get them out pretty quick. I also want to give a huge shout out to Dave Proctor. You guys may not know that he just crushed 121K in 15 days and still did a pretty crazy TikTok video dance. And I think he should probably do some of that dance for us right now. I mean,
I don't know. I think your viewers would drop in half if I did that, Christina. I'm not going to do that to you.
I don't know if I believe that story. I'm pretty sure that they would. I'm pretty sure that they would think it's pretty funny. I mean,
yeah, maybe funny, but yeah, they'll definitely have some different thoughts too, right?
That's true. But congrats, Dave. You definitely killed it. It was awesome to watch your journey.
Thanks, sister.
Yeah. And our spotlight athlete of this hour is Tom. He is running on the treadmill, crushing it today. Or I guess he's not on the treadmill anymore.
you must be
See, that's exactly what Dave was saying. It's just too easy to jump off when you're on a treadmill, right?
Right. He was there. But he does say, so he loves to run long distance, but his most memorable run is still doing his very first marathon. So I imagine he'll be back on soon and probably be really surprised that it's just his treadmill showing. But I will let you all get back to chatting. Thanks for letting me in. I'll see you guys in another half hour.
Great. Thank you, Christina. Bye. Dean, when you've done these long runs on the treadmill, how much break time do you take? Obviously, you've got to take a few bathroom breaks and consuming food while you're eating, but how many times during a 100-mile run, what is that downtime? Because we're looking at a pace that he's holding, but that includes his pit stops.
Yeah, well, I mean, it got really problematic during the 48-hour treadmill run because you're consuming so much liquid that obviously you got to use the bathroom quite a bit. And it was funny. The Guinness Book of World Record guy he had to be like physically watching me the entire time. He actually had to go into the restroom with me, and I just thought, why are you watching me pee in the toilet? I mean, that's crazy. Like you're logging my time to see if it's official, but he had to follow me all the way around. And I'll never forget on the morning of the second day of running. So it'd been about 46 hours of running, and I'm in a studio in Times Square, as you know, on Columbus Avenue. It was the ABC television studio, and there was literally people. I'm running, and there's this glass fishbowl that 2 feet away from me. There's 300 people on the street looking up at me. It was so bizarre, but I was barriered off by this glass. And I was starting to chafe really, really bad. Like, okay, I've been running for 46 hours, 2 days straight. Yikes. But I see this motorcade, this black motorcade, pull into the front of the ABC studios. And these guys, like these big, Secret Service guys with earbuds on and dark Ray-Bans get out, and they're kind of lining the corners. And a limo pulls up, and then someone gets out of the limo and is kind of like in this posse of people that usher this person into the ABC studio for an interview. So I'm like, wow, that's some dignitary. That's like an important person. So I'm running along and I'm like, okay, I got this kit behind the treadmill that's got Vaseline in there. You know, it's got body butter. I gotta just do my thing. And although there are 300 people looking at me like a guy's got to do what a guy's got to do. So I hop off the treadmill, get on the back, you know, dig into the body butter, put it down where the sun don't shine. I have no rag or anything around. So I just get back on the treadmill and start running. Well, about 15 minutes later, I see that whole posse come out of the newsroom and they start coming over to me. I'm like, oh, geez, what's going on here? And the posse kind of spreads, and out of the posse walks Barack Obama.
Ah,
Oh,
And
wow.
he looks up at me and he's like, I heard about what you're doing. I just got to shake your hand.
Oh, no.
ooh. That gooey hand, huh?
Oh, no.
Fist bump in the end, but it was like the most insane moment of time, you know, in my running history. It's surreal. I was like, oh God, am I hallucinating or what?
Well, that's an amazing story, guys. I'm gonna have to fly off because I promised. Part of this is I'm gonna run a treadmill marathon with Zach right now.
Are you?
So,
Man.
yeah, this is the plan.
It's early in
So-
the morning. It's early in the morning for you too. Are you ready to rock?
Well, hopefully, I might give it a bit of a limber up and see how we go, and then yeah. So this will be the furthest I've ever run on a treadmill. So
Wow, that's awesome. Well, Dan, thanks for joining us, and thanks for adding all your expertise. And I know you've got a huge following. A lot of people are looking at you athletically, but also for your exercise science and your great program that you have in the Kiwi country.
yeah, thanks very much. And nice to meet you, Dean. Nice to meet you, Dave. And
Enjoy your
We'll see you
tread,
soon.
enjoy your
We'll see you.
marathon.
yeah, we'll do. Ciao, ciao.
All right, see
Bye-bye.
you, Dan. Bye.